Hi, everybody, and welcome to We'll Talk with Artists. I'm Martha Campbell. I'm the current MFA Exhibitions Manager. If this is your first time with us, welcome. Maryland Federation of Art is a visual arts nonprofit, and our mission is to create meaningful connections in the community through art. One of our ways of doing this during quarantine is to hold digital discussions like the one we're going to have tonight. So let's jump into our seventh We'll Talk with Artists. I believe this is the seventh. Will Scott is an art historian, a photographer, and he recently retired as the head of adult programs at the National Gallery. He is also on the board of directors for the, sorry, my notes are all scrambled. Will is on our board of directors, and he is one of the most uniquely qualified members to help bridge the gap between artists and the public. Tonight, will be talking with Deb Banker, a local Annapolis artist who works in alabaster, marble, bronze casting, wood carving, and ceramics. Most of her work focuses on the female form and the goddess inside every woman. You can see more of her projects over at her website, bankersculpture.com.
Thank you, Martha, for that introduction and housekeeping announcements. And Deb, thank you for agreeing to subject yourself to this. I have the great opportunity to choose the members of the MFA that I interviewed during this COVID special programming time. And Deb's one of the artists that I met first a few years ago when I started to exhibit my photography through the MFA. And she's a very charming and friendly and welcoming person. And so I got to know her a little bit, and I got to know her work, and the idea of finding the goddess within every woman was a very appealing theme to me as a son, a husband, father, and a grandfather. So anyhow, I like her work very much, and I'm waiting for the day when my wife and I can have one in our collection. And that's not a pitch that you're expected to give the host of work after the interview. The interview is really an opportunity for all of you to get to know one of the MFA member artists, and hopefully for you to visit their website and perhaps support their work at a future time. So, Deb, thank you. And in a little bit of a sort of expected and routine sort of way, do you want to just quickly tell us about yourself and how you got to the point of being a creative artist?
Well, hi everybody. Thank you for coming. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I was interested in creative projects since I was very young. And throughout school, I took as many art classes as I could. I studied art at the Baltimore Museum of Art on Saturdays. That's where I grew up. And when I went to college, I knew I wanted to study art, but my family and I decided that it was better not to go to an all art school. So I ended at GW, and that was a perfect place for me to end up because it was the 70s and they had a very strong classical traditional art program. So with my interest in the figure, it was a great match.
I did not know that Deb went to GW. I actually was an adjunct faculty member there shortly after she graduated. That's how old I am. But a close friend of mine was on the faculty while she was there, although Deb was more interested in the studio part of the program. Anyway, so we found out we had that in common. How did you decide to become a sculptor? Because that's often the thing that a lot of students are interested in, but it is challenging for a number of different reasons, including the difficulty of many sculptural materials, traditional materials.
I think I've always loved working with my hands and making things, and it was really a natural fit for me. The more challenging the project or assignment was, or the materials were to learn, the more interested I was in it. And I found painting interesting, but not quite as challenging. And I really thrive on challenge. So I just love working with the materials.
What is it about the materials that is both challenging but then engaging that made you want to continue working on sculpture?
I think I like the complexity of the processes. I remember some of my first assignments in college were make a relief out of clay, and that was the whole assignment. That was all the instruction we got. So, you know, you had to kind of go and do a little bit of research and talk to older students, figure out what do you use, how do you use it. And another assignment also in my freshman year was make a self-portrait out of clay. And I really love that challenge of trying to capture the details and the likeness and see what I could do with the materials.
Well, let me dig into that a little more because the only studio course I ever took in college, I was kind of the reverse of Deb. I took the requisite one studio course that wasn't even required, actually. It wasn't a requisite. It was my advisor, because I wanted to go to graduate school in art history, said, well, you have to take a studio course so you understand struggles of an artist in their studio. And I took ceramics and turned out I had some ability. But back to materials, the way you described it, you were just sent into the studio and said, here, do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you learn which tools to use and how to use an armature and do all those things that are part of modeling in clay?
We sort of helped each other. It was a pretty small class. So one person might know how to cut the wood to make a background for a relief sculpture to put the clay on, and somebody else might know how to put what kind of pipes to use for a pipe armature to hold the head up. And somebody else knew where to get the clay.
So what did the instructor do? What did the instructor do?
It was around. Interestingly, the sculpture instructors at that time were not super strong. And I think I liked that sense of exploration where I had to figure it out myself and go and look for answers.
When did you first work with stone or metal?
Well, I worked with metal at GW. I knew I had a project that I wanted to do welding for, and they had a welding studio, which was an old garage in an alley off 21st Street. So I found a teacher who taught me how to turn on the acetylene tanks. And it was just like nobody was in there. It was a big garage with metal tanks.
Oh, I know where the building was.
Yeah. So he showed me how everything worked, and I kind of jumped right in. Luckily, I didn't know how dangerous it was at the time.
I did not know this about Deb before this moment, but my best friend in high school went to GW also a little earlier, and I was visiting him one time. He lived in, remember those old tenement-like buildings that were there before Red Lion Row was created?
Yep.
Well, we had been enjoying ourselves, and another guy in the room pulled out a pistol and started shooting rats in the alleyway. So that's sort of what GW could be like at that time. Everything you're telling me fits right in.
Yeah.
The free form, experiment. Anyway, so that's kind of interesting to me. I hope it is to you. Anyway, I digress. So most of what I have seen you do is in alabaster.
Right.
With marble often or usually for the base.
Yes.
How did you discover alabaster, and why have you used it so extensively?
Well, after I was married and I had moved to Annapolis and I was still trying to do my own art at home, I didn't have a studio. So I took a stone carving class at University of Maryland and did my first marble carving in one semester. It was a great class, and we made our own tools by forging, and we got the whole picture of how to do the process. So I met a stone carver in Annapolis, Joe Moss, who I sort of continued working with him, and he would help me when I was stuck with something. And as I carved more, I sort of went off and on with stone because of the mess and the weight. At the house I live in now, I have a studio in my garage. So it's level. You can just pull right in and take the stone off the truck. It's much easier. When I started buying stone online, I found a distributor in California, and he was real character. He was in the LA area. His name was Dodd Roth. And I bought a piece of marble for a commission. And then I wanted to buy some other stone to carve. And he talked me into the alabaster. I had never used it. But he said, listen, this is much softer. It'll take you half the time. Nobody really knows the difference. You know, in terms of selling the work, if it's not going to be outside, the difference in stone doesn't matter to anybody. And I think you'll really like it. So I tried it, and I was immediately converted to alabaster. I still carve marble occasionally for an outdoor piece, but I just love the translucency of alabaster. I like the different colors and the way it really captures the light.
So it was an accident that you used it, but then you discovered it was the nature of the material that suited your aesthetic interests or direction.
Yeah.
So say a little bit more, and maybe Martha, we could look at the first slide. Now, the way, Deb, the way that you had this lit, was that conscious where you positioned? Okay. So looking at these three pieces before we talk about.
This is one piece. This is 3 views of one piece.
Wow. Oh, I am even more impressed then. So say a little bit about, do you consider there to be a primary vantage point, viewpoint, and what is it about? Why did you decide to present 3 views of the same piece in this one slide?
Well, this is one of my more complex pieces. It's probably about 10 inches tall. And it just worked out really well. When I use a direct carving method when I approach a stone. I am working on this series of figurative pieces, so I know there's going to be a figure in it. I pick up the stone, I try to find the figure in it first. Then once I've sort of outlined the figure with my rough carving chisels, I decide what else is going to be part of the stone. I try to carve each piece so that it has a little bit of translucency in some part. So in this piece, on the thin edges that sort of look like a clamshell, that's where the light comes through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because it's such a complex piece, I really felt that I needed to include the 3 views
Okay.
to get a full feeling for the movement.
Yeah. So it was more of a way that you could reveal the true nature of the piece and of sculpture in general, because if you only see one view of a sculpture, then that's not really seeing the sculpture.
Right, right.
So you mentioned that you sort of try to find the figure within the stone and then reveal it.
Yes.
And was there any sculptor that you studied that made you think of that way of approaching the stone?
Well, I love Brancusi's work. I did spend a year in Paris in college, and you know, they have the replica of his old studio right there near Beaubourg, and it's just a magical place to walk into his studio. I mean, it's not exactly as he left it, but they really have recreated the feeling.
Right.
And he was one of the early proponents of direct carving, where you try to reveal what's in the stone, although Michelangelo did that as well.
Yeah. That's the art historian in me couldn't resist, but I preferred that you said it, rather than me saying, oh, did you know? But that is, to me, as a historian of art and an artist, exactly the way that I think great art often evolves. You know, somebody else said this, did that, but you're doing your own thing.
Right.
And those are more confirmations that maybe you've got a good idea here and that you're taking an approach that's been successful in the past. And so let me now talk a little bit. I want to stay with this piece, this image, and come back to it. But you usually work with the human figure, but you went to art school, you went to college at a time when often instructors were teaching people to, you know, build collages, do total abstract, non-representational pieces. So what was it that brought you to the figure and has kept you absorbed with the human figure?
Well, it was interesting because the sculpture teacher wasn't really strong, but my drawing teacher, Frank Wright, was amazing. And I took 3 years of drawing with him. I took way more than you were supposed to, but he was all about the figure. We had to memorize every bone, every muscle, and really construct it from nothing. So by the time I was finished with his classes, I had a really good grasp of anatomy, proportion, contrapposto, grace, and I was able to put that all together.
So he taught by having models come to the studio.
Yeah.
And then you would do the traditional sort of, first thing you do is you make a charcoal drawing or a pencil drawing, and then you model a figure, and then you turn to your stone or whatever you're going to do that's more durable.
Well, it was all drawing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was all drawing at that point, and the only figure work that I did was in clay, and I did do quite a bit of abstract work in other classes as well. And I took classes at the Corcoran at that time.
So you really had the benefit in some respects, and because I was in college and graduate school and, you know, knowing people that were in the studio program on both levels, you kind of had the benefit of a faculty that, whether they were weak or strong or how we might evaluate them, they had these very different approaches. And so you could you were exposed to all of this and you picked your own way through that, what you had the opportunity to experience and study.
Yes, yes, exactly.
All right, well, let's come back around then to the present time. And if I were, okay, I think the thing that makes the most sense is for me to say, I'm going to write an essay about your work.
Okay.
Or I'm going to write an article, you know, a critical review of your show. Tell me what it is that's happening in this piece.
It's a figure in motion, and sometimes I think of it as a figure underwater because the water gives a little bit of pressure back on the form. So that sort of helps create the undulating edges and waves. So it's sort of swimming and spinning and floating all at the same time, but moving forward. I like my figures to really have a sense of movement.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the futurists in the early 20th century?
Yes.
Any impact, connection, crossover? No is a perfectly good answer.
I can't think of his name. I'm thinking of the bronze figure of the man walking forward, where it looks like, you know, there are pieces coming out of the back. It's
Don't worry about it. Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Duchamp-Villon.
Well, Duchamp-Villon had a very famous figure that then affected and influenced the futurists. So, but we're not doing an art history talk,
okay.
So I'm going to back off that. I just wanted to see if you were aware of that, because as an art historian, it's interesting for me to see how often people will come to something that somebody else has done.
Mhm.
And I still don't know whether I think that it makes them more interesting because they didn't know about the other people, or because they did but found their own path to deal with the same subject. But anyway, so how did you decide to create this series? Let's go on to the next slide also, Martha. How did you choose the subject of the NAIAD?
I had made a conscious decision to work smaller in stone. I had done a couple of large pieces, and while they're fun and challenging, it's just hard to move them around.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do a series of very small pieces, so that I could work faster and kind of develop and work through ideas quicker, instead of having it take a couple years, maybe a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So the first NAIAD I did, and I like to create a deadline for myself. That's the best way for me to get work done. The first NAIAD I created was for one of the exhibits at St. John's, the juried county exhibits.
Uh-huh.
And
How long ago was that?
that was 2014.
Okay.
So 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was only 4 inches tall. It was very small, and it was a very compact figure, sort of a vertical female torso with wide hips, and then coming off of the back where the head would be, it was sort of like a scallop shell collar.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of an experiment. I thought, well, I'm going to try this and let's see what kind of response I get. So I put it in the exhibit, and it sold immediately. And I had several others that I had started, but that was the one that I had finished first. And I got a lot of really good feedback about it. So that sort of gave me the little bit of encouragement that I needed to continue to explore the avenue of the figures with undersea elements in motion.
So the mythological identity of the NAIAD has nothing to do with what you're trying to do and why you chose the title?
Well, as I continued to develop the first 20 that I did, I picked specific NAIADs and named them after that, and sort of did a little bit of research about the character and what they were known for, and worked that into the figure, the movement, and the elements.
Well, that's a nice segue to this piece, because this is the same piece front and back, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any significance in your mind, any reason other than purely aesthetic, that one side is very light and the other is very dark?
No, that's a gift of the stone.
Okay.
That's and that's another one of my favorite things about working with alabaster, is that you can guess at what it's going to look like, but it's not until you do the sanding that you really see the colors come out.
Yeah.
And the grain, which way the grain is going.
So if I were to say to you, well, as a man of my age and generation, women have a bright side and a dark side, is that okay?
Sure. Why not?
Yeah.
I love that if I put art out into the world, different people see different things in it. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I do too. That's a part of the excitement of being an artist, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the way that I know you best. This is the way I think I got to, was introduced to your work and you through that same show at St. John's, where I also was a participating artist. And so this is what I love about your work, and this is what has always interested me. But I found out as we prepared that you also, and you mentioned it in our conversation, do figures from life, and you're doing some portraits. So
Yes,
Martha, if we could pull up the portraits. There we go. So these are contemporaneous, correct? Or relatively contemporaneous?
Actually, these three have been made in that exact same time frame since 2014.
So how you have mediated between abstraction and representationalism in your student years and now in your career, but this is very fine, but very traditional. I mean, like, this is the root of Western sculptural art,
Yeah.
the human figure and a lifelike representation. So how does that work in your head and in your studio?
Well, it's kind of a nice break when these are commissions. I had a client who came to my studio to buy a Naiad figure. And when she was there, we were talking and she was looking around, and I had some portraits, older portraits I had done against the back wall. And she was very interested in those and got excited about them and said, would I be willing to do her granddaughter? And I said, yes, I'd love to. So she bought the Naiad and also commissioned me to do her granddaughter, which is Caroline in the middle, was the first of the three. So these are siblings, and of 5. I'm also doing number 4 now. I love the interaction of the model, having a model sit for a portrait and working in clay right there with them in person. In the modern world, people don't have enough time to sit for the whole portrait session. So I also use photographs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination of in-person sitting and photographs. I use water-based clay and get as close as I can. Then I hollow it out, fire it, and paint it with acrylic paint to replicate a bronze patina.
Are they life size?
These are smaller than life size. These are, Caroline is 6 inches from chin to top of head, and both of the boys are 7.
So that's maybe half life size.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I think our last slide shows the one that's in process.
Yes.
Okay, let's look at that, because I have a question. As I looked at this earlier, this young man is what I think, sort of, and I mean this in an objective way, to use the term, conventionally handsome young man. He's got,
I would agree,
features and they're very proportional, and he is looking very sort of poised, but the model seems a little older, a little more rugged, not just because of the surface, and I understand this is a work in progress, but there's something about the lift of the chin, the corners of the mouth. It just looks like an older, more sort of not aggressive, but assertive figure. Is that because it's in process, or is that what you were sort of trying to pull out of it?
I think it's a little bit of both. This one I did a little bit differently from the first 3. This head is life size, the clay head that you see. So because I wanted to work as fast as I could while he sat for me, so I made this life size bust, and then I'm going to make a smaller one so that it fits with the others as a set. But he just graduated from the Naval Academy, so I think that there's a little bit of that personality in there that you see that I was trying to capture, and maybe partly that it's not finished, so it's rough.
Yeah. Well, then I want to ask you the question that I think anybody that does portrait work in any media has to expect at some point. What's the real purpose, the most important purpose of a portrait figure?
For me, it captures a moment in time, especially all of the portraits of this family I've done in their college years, some at the beginning, some in the middle, some at the end. So, and young women's faces are a little more stable at that age, but young men's faces change a lot, like for the next 5 or 6 years.
That's because they're not stable at that point of their lives. I know, I have a son, so I can have been through the same experience.
Okay, you said it, I didn't.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I own it for whatever anybody wants to do with it.
Yeah, I'm sort of trying to capture a moment in their life. You know, it's that moment when you're in college at whatever part of that you are.
So you would say, would you agree that it's to represent them as they actually are at that moment in time?
Yes.
Yeah. You know that John Singer Sargent, the great American portrait painter, stopped painting portraits in mid-career at great success because he said portraits were a type of art about which something was always wrong with the mouth.
Well, that's true. I do agree with that.
Well,
And
go ahead.
It's hard to do a portrait. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that's never done.
Yeah.
I could keep working on it for a longer time. So.
Well, he also was trying to politely say that he had had the experience too many times of what he thought was a very successful portrait, and the patron who commissioned it either rejecting it outright or taking it home but putting it in a closet, literally in a closet.
Well, I don't have that problem. My patrons are wonderful, and they might suggest a slight change, but they're usually right.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, I think this has been a tremendous conversation, and I've learned so much about you and about your work. Maybe you could just in a few minutes, because you're a teacher, and I wonder if you want to just say a few words about the relationship of your work in the classroom with young people and your work as an artist.
Okay.
Is there a
Okay.
symbiosis or is there a conflict, I guess is this straightforward way to ask the question.
I find that there's a great symbiosis between teaching and doing my own work. I've been teaching for 30 plus years in different places. Currently, I'm teaching full-time at a private high school in Howard County, high school, ceramics and sculpture. So the great thing is I'm doing artwork all day, every day. And I learn a lot from the students, from their ideas and helping them implement their ideas and figuring out what the best material is or how to do the assignment the way I want them to. There's always that give and take. And I think that it's really helped make my work deeper, and it's certainly improved my skills, my manual and intellectual skills, because it's challenging that way. So I feel very lucky that I can do it, even if it's not my own art. I'm working in art, in sculpture and ceramics all day. So
you ever go home from the classroom with an idea for a work or to do something different with a work that's underway?
Yes, I do. And I don't show a lot of my own work in my classroom. A little bit I do, especially to like the AP or the senior students, but I don't want to overwhelm the kids with what I'm doing, because it's more about what they're doing. But yeah, I do get ideas. I do.
Well, I'm very happy to hear you say that, just as a grandparent, because I think that one of the worst things a teacher can do is to try and create little replicas of themselves, you know. And
no, I tell the students, every now and then we do a portrait bust, and I say, if all these busts look the same when you're done, I didn't do my job.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to end this part of our conversation, I think. Again, Deb, thank you. And now we'll open it up for questions, and Martha's going to be the referee.
Thank you, Will.
I have a question.
Okay.
Sure, I can start it off. So I have always loved your work, Deb. 5 years ago, when I applied for a job here at Circle Gallery, your show, you had a show in Holly Gallery, and that was my first introduction to MFA.
I remember.
And while I was working here, like that first month or something, it was like I fell in love with your pieces. They're very like feminine and moving, and this is the philosophy student in me coming out, but like. It's such a specific kind of signature, your work. And I wonder if you have either like mentally or physically like an end goal, like a telos of the project, if there's something in mind that you're like trying to reach for. And I know that's very philosophy questioning, but like your pieces are just so charming, and they're all like with this perfect Deb Banker signature.
Well, thank you very much. That's great feedback. And it's a wonderful question. I don't have an end goal. I guess with each piece that I carve, I'm trying to make it better than the last one. And I'm trying to explore different physical attributes of the female form. So I definitely don't want them all to be straight and skinny, although certainly there are some of those in the series, but I'm really trying to also look at different body types and different movements and different attitudes. And what I find interesting is somebody loves all of them, you know, like not like sometimes I'll show one to my husband, he's like, no, you're not done. I'm like, oh yes, I am. And then I'll show that in public, and somebody will really love that. Someone will relate to it. So, right now it's an open-ended quest.
That was a great question, Martha. It's something for all of us to think about, whether we're artists or not. But I'm laughing because my wife and my son are my harshest critics. And last year, I think all of you know about Collector's Choice. I had this non-objective piece that I wanted to put in, and my wife's comment was, nobody will take that. Well, the person who took it sought me out and said, I don't know what I think about this, but it makes me think. Well, I'm happy.
That's great.
Yeah, now I'm happy. So, other questions? Let's go. Wave, Deb?
Yes?
Deb, you need to unmute Deb, or she needs to unmute herself.
You're still on mute. You have to click so I just sent you a little request to unmute yourself, Deb. There you go. You're good.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I thought I hit that, but I must have missed it. It's interesting, Deborah, that I have worked in the business, museum business for a number of years as a vendor, and we make life-size realistic figures for museums. And so I do not do any of the head sculpting at all. I am more where we're building arms and legs and using screwdrivers and hammers and nails. But we've worked with sculptors because the heads have to be sculpted. We can't do life cast the rest of us stick our hands into a big vat of dental alginate and wait for 5 minutes and try to get your hand out. But it's really interesting to hear you talk about the difficulty of the facial, getting it right. And I mean, we're working as a middle person between the sculptor and the client. And then we'll have a client come in and say, well, it's not quite pensive enough. So we have to go back to the artist and say, can you make this pensive? And it's
that's difficult.
It is because it's in this situation, you're pleasing, you please Howard, pleasing the client directly, and whereas we are working in the middle. But I understand when you said it's really difficult, I thought, yeah, it's not for me.
Yeah. I don't do portrait photography either.
Yeah. And especially hard to be the middleman in that conversation.
Well, kind of. Yeah, because you just pass it back and forth.
Yeah, you don't have any control.
Right. And we don't have to, we don't have to worry about having the control or making it right. We just say, you got to make this right. The client is not happy.
Yeah. Any other questions? Carol?
Well, more of a comment. I think it's part of the success of your piece is that they do move. And that might be because you're working reductively rather than additively, as you would in clay. Also, the pieces are very lyrical. They're smooth, they're massaged, but you're working contrastingly in a hard material. So they're masculine and feminine, hard and soft. And that really helps the success of the presentation.
Thank you. That's really a fascinating observation. I do, and I love the finishing process of, like you said, massaging the surface to get that smooth quality.
Right. And I think we met, oh gosh, ages ago. You were working mostly in clay, as I was at the time.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you morphed. I didn't.
Well, but you moved
Well, you
on to
did.
other media.
You did.
Very
I
successful.
moved into two-dimensional, right? Right. Yeah. And I do mess around with paint rather than clay. So
Yeah, you move it a lot.
that's true.
Yep. Other questions? Okay, Julius? Julius, and then maybe John, are you asking a question too? We'll get there.
Yeah, this is not so much a question, but it's just picking up on Carol's comment about how smooth and how beautifully you create something from alabaster. The Naiad number 36, I think the one that you showed in the 3 views, reminded me very much of an Edward Steichen photograph of Isadora Duncan's sister, Therese, who is standing on the Acropolis with wind whipping through her diaphanous garb.
Yeah.
And you were able to capture that same kind of movement and fluidity in the alabaster, both with the light and with the sculpting of it. And
Thank you very much.
Really, really
I'll have to look for that photograph.
Before we take John's question, Deb, have you ever seen the video? Well, it's a movie of the famous dancer Loie Fuller. She's her thing in the late 19th, early 20th century was she used stage lights with the different colored cells that she would plan out the music that she would dance to. Very long, fluid, diaphanous gowns, and then the stage crew would be instructed when to change the cells so the color would kind of kaleidoscope over her body. You can find it by just Googling Loie Fuller online, but I think that you might really enjoy that, and so might some of the others. So John, I think you want to ask a question?
Finally figured out how to unmute. Deb has been my instructor several times.
Excuse me, John, are you outdoors?
I am.
I think the wind is interfering, so you'll have to get close to your microphone.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, excellent.
All right. I've been fortunate to be in Deb's class over at St. John's a couple of times. Pardon this up close view of my eyes. I wonder if there is, for sculptors in clay, something like a plein air opportunity, for people to all gather together at some event or space and all work together. We had this experience in the classroom, and I want to see it expanded to other people.
That's a great idea. Have to think about that. I like it.
I want to be there.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else that wants to jump in? Barbara? Unmute. You've got to unmute. Martha, maybe you want to send that mess. There you go. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I want to credit Deb with encouraging seniors to unleash their creativity. I was a student from the early days in the barn at Montgomery College and took courses from her for years. And I just want to thank her for turning me on to alabaster and turning me on to direct carving. It was an amazing part of my life and still is. Thank you,
Thank
Deb.
you, Barbara. That's very sweet. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Okay, if there aren't other questions, then I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly enjoyed getting to know Deb and her work better. Thank you, Deb, again, for being willing to participate. And Martha, thank you for your help as the moderator. All right.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Good fun.
Thank you. Great.